My name is Carole Cragg. Well, I'm guessing it must have been Kevin because he was teaching here, and there must have been a faculty party or something that we went to, maybe at Dr. Brushover's home or something here on campus, and I met Carol Hansen. That's the only thing I can figure out. Carol then knew we visited and found out I was a librarian and had worked at the Trinity College Library and had a degree. And they knew that Della Shoup was going to be going on maternity leave. And so they needed somebody short-term and part-time, well, pretty much part-time. And so she told the staff when they knew they needed to replace somebody that talked to me. And so that's how I got that position. First of all, I was a reference librarian. Then I was a reference and program development librarian. That was probably my favorite. Then I was an associate librarian, associate director, and then finally an acting director between Bob Suderman and David Stewart. And then the unofficial ones were, well, as I told at my retirement party, that I was given enough rope to hang myself and often did. That's because but I loved being that free, and was most of the things then that I did along with that was to make connections with other departments or programs. So, for example, working well, and none of what I did to work with people could have happened at all if it hadn't been for the staff, who are so hardworking and so smart and so creative that if I would come with an idea, there were a couple of people that would say, no, we can't do it. And then 2 weeks later, they'd say, well, this is how we could do it better than what you thought. And so I loved that. And so several of those we moved prime time up to the library. Maybe you knew that already. I don't know. But prime time, it was not ready for prime time, and it was held in a classroom. This is my memory. I think it's pretty accurate on this. At 4 p.m, when people who had something they were preparing for publication, they wanted to get some feedback from other faculty. So faculty were invited. And the ones I went to, it was just a pretty small people that came. So I went to Deb Harless and I said, Deb, I think that students and faculty and staff should be able to hear these programs so they learn about, and especially the students, so they would learn about lifelong learning, that just because you got your PhD, you're not done learning. And she agreed to help get that started. And so we came with that first, where faculty could make their presentations. And then as people did come, they volunteered, well, students who've gone abroad, well, wouldn't it be good if they came? Or here's this other program that we're doing people don't know about. Or gradually, they weren't specific departments. It might be April, is Poetry Month, and we'll do that. And it's still going. So it's really, it's just so much fun. It's so much fun to see something like that grow. And then the Information Commons, Bob Kissler was really important in that, because it was sort of a hot thing starting off in big universities and stuff to have an Information Commons, so you could have technology supported right by where you had reference supported. And we gradually got that. Bob had an office right behind the reference desk, and somebody if we could just go get him if we needed to. But we started even checking out equipment because that made it possible for people to use more of the technology. That was one of them. Women's History Month. I don't think obviously we didn't start women's history, but I think we were pretty deeply into helping other departments. We helped music. We got choirs from places to come, and drama, and all the stuff we had in the library that we could show. When I retired, they were going to get rid of the one video I loved, but it turned out that they thought it was somewhere else available. And it was just a short, like 10 or 15 minutes about how women had held, life together and the things that they did in advance. So they gave it to me. I don't have anything it'll play on, but it was fun. It was really a lot of fun. I think those are probably some of the most important things that came out of me being program development that I just loved. I didn't look up all of the committees, but I did serve on some that were with IT because that was so important to us. And we used to have what we called dropping the drawers, which the librarians had to check what the students had done with putting the cards in, new cards for new items, and then we'd have to go through and pull the rod. But the Women's Concerns Committee I did serve on for several years. Well, of course, my colleagues were just amazing people. But Deb Harless wasn't a provost, and she was I don't remember what she was before. Well, she taught too. And she was just sort of not high-handed, and she was always very helpful with us when we tried to get the faculty status thing straightened out. As I think I told you earlier, two of the librarians had faculty status, and those of us that were hired after that did not have faculty status. So she was, after we'd gone through this with administration to get our have faculty status, and then I went through the process so that there'd at least be an example. After that point, suddenly we had another administrator who said that we could do that to get titles like assistant, associate, and senior librarian, but we could not be on the faculty salary scale. And we were having trouble getting even people to apply for jobs. So, and the two that had faculty status had different salaries. So it was difficult, but Deb really stepped in afterwards, and just before we found out, I think, that we were not going to be on that scale, to help us figure out what all we had to do to make it formal and long-lasting. And so that was one of her great contributions to our lives and I think to the whole community. We always were doing research about who we should be working with, and we all took these tests on what we would be good at by describing what we enjoyed, whether it was actually reading a book about it or whether it was, and then we would figure out. So it's harder for me to say as the associate who I didn't work with. And we even tried to figure out who we had to go see the most every day. And so we moved around to different offices so that instead of running across the library to talk to the person you always needed to work with, we moved people to the proper, or a better office, maybe not a proper office, but a better office. After Rhonda came, I've worked a lot with her. And of course, I was part of the reference staff. So we had our own meetings and our own retreats. And and of course, I worked with the directors. It's sometimes. And then I thought, well, of course, sometimes this happened in a previous century when I was here, except for, occasionally. Occasionally it was actually a single person. We did have a male librarian, not the director, that came to the reference desk when I was working there one time and started yelling at me and complaining about all the reference staff because the rest were women. And so in front of a student, which just was intolerable to me. So as soon as the student had gotten what they needed, I went to his office and said that was very inappropriate behavior and that if it ever happened again, I would be at HR. And it never happened again. So that was good. I have had a male faculty person from the seminary stand up when he came to my office. And I honestly think he was, trying to so I stood up because the person happened to be very short. And I think they just thought they had to dominate. And there's been a few other things. I suppose most of them came out after the Women's Concerns Committee wrote a policy. Some of them directed at me, some of them just had, conversation with the rest of the faculty. But overall, as long as I was working in the library, I really was free to say, well, why don't we do this? And sometimes we did, and sometimes we didn't. But I have to say it was my happiest, or almost, besides my children and my husband, my job was just so great. I just loved doing it. I loved being there. And so, yeah, for the most part, I was never felt dominated or, I know I had one other with an administrator one time when that person was pounding on the desk because I disagreed. And so I just sat quietly till after that subsided. And then we had another small conversation about some other ideas were possible. Well, I wasn't on it when it was founded, but I found notes back to as far as, I believe, 1987, when a faculty person was here, and now I wish I could remember her name, who was in literature, English literature, and she was published and was quite well known. So there was a letter or some communication with the president about some issues that they wanted to discuss. Well, some of the topics were like single women who had children, so that trying to figure some social opportunities for them where they could talk to each other about, oh man, how hard this is. I know it was for students for sure, because I think we'd started these graduate programs and other programs to get baccalaureate degrees. So I do remember that, and I'm trying to remember, I wrote it down somewhere. I don't remember the other topics, but it was things that, like maternity leave, that was another big topic that we worked with, and tried to find policy around. So those were some of the topics that I remember. Actually, the inclusive language started with the president sending notes. Well, maybe it didn't start at 1987 when the other person was on, but by the time I was on it, that was 1992, I believe, and I've got some documents that give that date, 1992, and then it was taken up again in about 1994. Does that that might sound right from the research you've done too, I'm guessing. That's what I looked for the time, and I cannot find it. I looked through a bunch of documents, but I know when we brought it to the faculty as a whole, that was one time when we as a group discussed who should bring that to the faculty, and we decided not me. Because I think that was the year I may have chaired the committee. And so, but Don Postema was the one that presented it to the faculty. Well, yeah, there were always some issues, but I was never 40 hours a week. Oh, yes, forgive me if I said this. I was once an acting dean in my, well, that was because Trisha Brownlee was on sabbatical. And so there were things they could figure they could cut out of that position, and somebody else would do the others and I would do. But it was only for 10 hours. And this was pretty interesting, actually. So, of course, I was here at 6:30 every morning. I know that's not about, well, kids were grown and older, so it was, or older at least. And so I worked a lot of hours. But before I took that job, I was interviewed with other people, and HR called me and said, well, they really want you to come. And I thought, oh, okay. And then they said, oh, but by the way, you will lose your benefits because you will not be in one department full time. And I said, well, I won't do it then. And they said, what? He'll be mad. I said, I don't care. I'm not losing my benefits. Well, then they figured it out. So, but that was one other odd moment of being I'm sure as a woman, I can't imagine them have said, now you're going to lose your benefits. Well, of course, you're in a different position as being, but in my family, I was so lucky to have my dad be my dad, because he always, the first story I heard from him about this was when I was born, my aunt was there to help my mother. It was her sister. And when he came home, nobody in our family knew how to dance. He danced her around the kitchen and said, I got a girl, I got a girl. Which, and he told me that he did that he was so happy. And he always wanted me to tell the truth about what I wanted or needed. And every day I got one of those razor burn hugs from him. He would hug me before he shaved. So yeah, I just felt so, he tried to teach me the same thing he did my younger brother. And I don't know what he taught my older brother. We're 8 years apart, but no, he was always, my mom was very concerned about where I was going to go to college, and he took me aside and said, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And so I just felt so supported as a kid. And as an adult, he wanted me to take his business. He had 2 sons, but he wanted me to take over his business. I never told them that. That would have been naughty. I did a naughty thing. Yeah, and then in college, well, yes, in college, if you were a woman and lived in a dorm, you had to be in at 10 in my era. And they would come on Wednesday and go through our rooms while we were in chapel, because it was 5 days a week. They had a day they came through and they would check to see if our dressers were dusted, if our beds were made. I was totally incensed by that. I just didn't grow up like that. And so I couldn't believe it. And then I volunteered my first year with my roommate to go do some tutoring in the inner city of Chicago. And so we didn't get a chance to get dinner. Of course, the guys could do whatever they wanted. They could be in it anytime they wanted. I guess they couldn't get pregnant. But so we would come and we would lower a little basket out our window down to some guy who would go get us some supper and bring it back, and we'd haul it up. And so we closed our door and locked our door. And our RA thought we were in there smoking. Why else would they have their door locked? So undergraduate, and sometimes occasionally faculty, but I think mostly we were treated like students. And where I worked before, at the University of Illinois Library, it was, they gave me some regular people who had library degrees jobs because they didn't do it. So they just gave me their jobs to do. And at Trinity, I had sort of the same thing where I could get together with other faculty people and create programs and handouts, and yeah, so Bethel is pretty good, I would say. Well, I think I wanted to say another word about Deb Harless, because when we finally got a worked out program and then it didn't happen, she was just so good to us. And she was always just honest with us. We could do this, but we probably can't do that. And so I think that's, and I think I had such a good time working in the library and with so many people around campus. It was a joy. It was a joy to be here. I guess my hope is that they'll stay with their pietist roots, because I do worry that, especially in hard times and recruitment of students, that they might, I guess, turn more toward what some evangelicals have become in recent years, because they have students or families in those places. And so that's my true worry about the school, and hope that they'll stay with the, all things in charity. And I had asked you that for that quote, which you told me might have gone back to Augustine. Kevin would appreciate that.